I am your host, Jason Miles, and this is Revolution Podcast, Audio Edition. Happy Wednesday for the majority of you. For the patrons, happy Tuesday. This was taken from our Saturday free show, which is one of the more fun shows to do, mainly because it's the end of our show week, kind of, for some of the guys, not necessarily me. And this was one we had on the calendar for a while that I kind of had a star by as this might be a spicy one. The show is titled The War on Abortion, and it is a deep Marxist take, leftist take, analytical take on the way we look at the idea of women's reproductive rights and Planned Parenthood, Medicare for all, or should I say, I don't necessarily like single payer. The privatization of certain aspects of women's health care in general. And then after about an hour plus of this very heavy discussion, somehow, I don't know exactly how, maybe because the scuttlebutt in the news is Neil Young versus Joe Rogan, but we had a long music discussion. There's definitely some things that frustrate me as a musician, plus being an insider in the music industry, as a person that actually did financial reports for major music venues throughout California and every major music festival, not every, but the majority of all the major music festivals that you know of, EDC, Coachella, Bonnaroo, name another one. There's just too many to name. And kind of understanding the motivations and inner workings of these things a little bit more than the conversations that people get, and even getting into a bit of a discussion about how Neil Young, while the boycott or removal from Spotify has gained a lot of news coverage, what has not gained coverage is the fact that Neil Young last year sold 50% of his music catalog, his rights, to a hedge fund company that invests in major finance companies that he guess he has no problem with. Did that for $150 million, and he's not the only one. So we definitely had two. This is kind of like two shows for one. So enjoy. If you have a comment, write it, give us a comment. Let me know what you think about this show. This is a heavy topic. Wherever you're listening, subscribe. And I am out. Hello, good morning to most, good evening to some, good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and I'm very excited about the show we have today as we're going to tackle a tough topic, a topic that I think the left does not handle properly. And it's also probably going to be a little uncomfortable for me, Marcus and Pascal. That being said, if you haven't done it yet, if you're new to the show, if you found us on The Real News after watching our Adolph Reed Jr. or Chris Hedges episode, please hit the like and subscribe button as we are constantly adding new programming in the new year. So we want you to be alerted whenever we go live with something, as we're dropping more clips from the shows, as you've seen. Like spicy takes, if you will. So hit the like, hit the subscribe. And if you have the means and you feel so inclined, become a patron. You get access to all of the after hours episodes where we go behind the paywall and conversation deeper. It's crazier, more fun, more controversial. And for those that have already subscribed, oh yeah, you know what the hell I'm talking about. Let me bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. If you didn't know, he has a new chair. This new chair, some think, have changed Pascal for the better? Is he even spicier now? Off air, we were calling him Black Thanos at the way he looks in the chair, or Blanos. So let me bring in the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Romero.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. Vito, you weren't made for this life. What are you talking about? Why do you disrespect me this way?
And you guys thought he didn't have a sense of humor. That is his impression of Miles Davis doing an impersonation of Vito Corleone. We have our other co-host with us today. He had been absent, and because of that absence, Pascal forgot about all the other weeks he was ever on the show. It took one absence to be totally forgotten. He was recently on the Nomiki Kant's show talking about Russia and the Ukraine. I was going to say, I won't say it. I'll write you a letter of what I was going to say because I don't want to get you in trouble. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
What's up? And, I do want to give a shout out to Black Alliance for Peace because they also had some movements going in front saying no war with Russia. And that should be the take. But thank you and good to see you, Blanos.
You got a joke. That's a blonde Corleone to you, buddy.
No, it's good to be back. It's good
to have you back. Also, we're supposed to be launching the sports show this week. Tomorrow.
Yeah, we can do that.
I meant to call you.
We can probably do that. Yeah.
I'll probably have to talk to you after the show.
We'll talk after.
I'm really bad at this. I blame Jean Bajlan.
I feel like we'll be in stride by like next NFL season, and I feel like that's gonna be good. I feel like it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Somebody in the chat said Bengals. That is, man, you are a fan for real. That's okay. It's okay. But we have two returning guests. So I'm glad I didn't say that thing, Marcus. We have two returning guests coming on the show, both
guests have been on for some of our more popular shows, actually. I will introduce our first guest. She wrote the papers that we're going to be discussing today. Lillian Cicerchia is a postdoc at the Institute of Philosophy at the Free University of Berlin. Her areas of specialization are political philosophy, feminist philosophy, and critical theory. Her research is about capitalism, structural injustice, and the intersection of the two, especially the ways in which capitalism influences experiences of social group oppression. Why she is so interesting. Please welcome the Lillian Chichirchia.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Good afternoon to you, Dr. Lillian.
Good evening. In Europe.
Remember, she's overseas. She's in Berlin.
That's right.
Nice to see everybody. Thanks for having me back.
They have the spicy Haagen-Dazs in Berlin?
Spicy Haagen-Dazs? Is that what you just said?
Haagen-Dazs ice cream. Is Haagen-Dazs German?
They don't have a lot of spicy things in general. I don't think that they have like Haagen-Dazs ice cream that's spicy.
Haagen-Dazs ice cream is German, though, right? Is it?
I think so, yeah.
You are just.
It sounds German to me. I don't have anything else to say about ice cream.
And that's all I have to say about that. And our next guest is a professor at Missouri State University. For those of you that are patrons and fan of the show, you know our guest as the person that brought condom washing into the TIR lexicon. But she's more than a condom scholar. She is an assistant professor of East Asian history at Missouri State University. Her forthcoming book examines birth control and abortion in China from the early 20th century to the present. And she's not afraid to go to the black church. She is Dr. Sarah Mellors Rodriguez.
Good morning, Dr. Sarah.
We can't hear you. Did you mute yourself? You trying to find where the
I'm having
unmute
an over 40 moment. I'm not over 40, just to clarify, but I'm having one of those moments.
Well, look here, Dr. Sarah. I am over 40, and F you. Talking shit about being over 40. I'm over 40, and shit doesn't work the way it used to. And sometimes I can fart and pull a muscle. And that is being I will stop with the sound effects and get serious.
Everyone in the chat is informing us that Haagen-Dazs is not a German brand. It's fake, just so we're all clear.
Haagen-Dazs is the
like that.
It's the fortune cookie of ice cream. Is that what you're telling me?
Haagen-Dazs has a really interesting history. So like I think it's like some people who wanted to make it seem like a Jewish company, or some Jews who wanted it to not seem like a Jewish company. Okay, I'm completely butchering the story, but something about Jewish people and making money and ice cream, and that is the origin story.
Would that be a crypto Jew, Pascal?
I'm just trying to count the moments till cancellation.
You know, we have like pro-Palestine shows, and you said Jew 5 times. Like, we're definitely done. And we had Finkelstein on. Like, people still bring up Finkelstein. 2 things you can't say in the same show: Finkelstein, Jew, and crypto.
Just waiting for the emails from the ADL.
Well, I want to get into our conversation while we have our guests here. What are the limitations of the liberal framework in which we view reproductive rights? Is the Roe verdict enough of a protection of women's reproductive rights? Has the left as a whole gotten complacent with the Roe decision that it can only view that decision as a blanket protection for all women, regardless of class? Roe's initial victory was due mostly to the 14th Amendment's due process clause, which SCOTUS agreed provides a fundamental right to privacy that protects a pregnant woman's liberty to make her own decisions about her reproductive health with minimal government interference. Has the left forgotten that that right was never absolute? Even after Roe, and every woman's reproductive choices under Roe is subject to a balancing test against the government's interest in protecting women's health and prenatal life. Roe didn't give women unlimited freedom to choose or unfettered access to abortions. It merely ruled that the specific Texas law at the time violated due process. Lillian, I'll let you take the lead on this.
Okay.
What
yeah.
are the limitations of the way in the way that we look at the Roe v. Wade decision?
Well, I think so. First of all, Roe is a very limited like legal precedent for reproductive rights in all the ways that you described. Like, it's based on due process, the right to privacy. So you're fundamentally talking about what individual, that's why in our culture we say it's, my body, my choice. It's a choice I make between me and my doctor. That's like it sounds like it could be, but it's actually not yet saying that abortion is healthcare. Right. So like when we talk about healthcare, we say healthcare is a right. I mean, on the left, that's what we say. It's a right.
Mm-hmm.
It's how you have it's a basis in which you're able to exercise other rights. We think about it in terms of a social good, social welfare, whatever language you want to use. And that's not how we talk about abortion rights. We talk about abortion rights in this much more choice-based way. And so I think it's definitely become widely accepted on the left, and also in left liberal spaces, that the choice framework or the privacy-based framework is insufficient because in general, like, it doesn't guarantee that you have access to something. It simply guarantees that you have a choice. And so like after there's further cases that, when people started to try to interfere with that choice, the anti-abortion movement and the right started to restrict your ability to make that choice, then suddenly the courts had to decide what it meant to create, like, how far does your choice go, right? Like how much of a choice do you have? And when does it stop being a choice? And so then the emerging consensus was that, well, it's a choice if there's no undue burden on you. So then in making that choice. So then we all have to debate what's an undue burden. And that's a really strange thing. Like, once you've already gone to the place where you're talking about undue burdens, it's like, can I just like harass women outside of clinics? Can I follow them home from, like, can I take their license plates numbers? Can I stalk them? Is that to intimidate them out of getting abortions? Can I corner them on streets? Can I walk around Manhattan asking women within a 3-block radius of a Planned Parenthood if they're pregnant? Is that an undue burden? Is poverty an undue burden? Is lack of access to healthcare in general an undue burden? I mean, so then the terrain of debate about like what this thing is and how it connects to other social goods is a profoundly narrow debate. And then, just to simply answer your question, the reason it's able to become that narrow is because it's a weak framework to begin with. And I'll let others jump in if they'd like to, but maybe that can kind of spark some initial discussion.
I did
I'd
have
actually like to jump in because there's someone, Andy Williams, made a very, very interesting comment, and I wrote an article, something to this nature, for Black Agenda Report several years ago. It was called Black Eugenics, and I'm interested in particularly how, in certain, I don't know if we would call it conservative or more nationalist spaces, one of the problems in which the choice or health issue is contrived in communities of color, particularly the Black community, stems from the fact that abortion, or the right thereto, has been tied to eugenics, going
Mhm.
back to the early 20th century, Margaret Sanger, so on and so forth. And the way the whole issue is painted as if is under a conspiratorial belief that this is a racialized population control exercise. So you will see people talking about statistics relative to that 20 million black children have been aborted since 1970, and so on and so forth. And this is kind of the normalized discourse that you would see in sometimes more nationalist spaces, to also even just straight up black reactionary Christian spaces as well. In terms of pivoting the discourse to right to abortion as a healthcare choice, which I think is a very sound pivot, by the way, Lillian. How do we find a way to address the controversy that comes up when that type of history is leveraged in communities of color?
So you're asking, so just to be clear, the first point is about the analysis, the skepticism of abortion rights. And then the second part is how to pivot rhetorically to kind of relieve worries about that history.
Not so much relieve worries, because I think we can argue that some of those worries are on questionable grounds, right? But I'm trying to sharpen the argument that you're already making to really become an effective bulwark against that type of discourse in communities of color, particularly, because there is legitimacy to that history in terms of the way the rhetoric around reproductive rights was originally kind of tied to racialized language.
So I think that there are a couple different issues. So the way that people tell this story about abortion rights being tied to eugenics is it's already a murky set of propositions. Like, there's a kernel of truth to this that I think is really important to take seriously. It's also a kind of concession to a pretty conservative conflation among several things at the same time. So, like, on the one hand, it is true that there is a connection between the birth control movement and the eugenics movement. It's also the case that the birth control movement and the abortion rights movement are not necessarily the same thing and overlap in various NGOs and kind of government outfits at various points in time. So I think that there is like a set of a complicated history there that is worth taking seriously. But I also think it's a little bit more complicated than that initial story that you laid out allows. But neither here nor there. Like, one could argue, say, just like take that kind of perception of the abortion rights movement as it stands and say, okay, there's skepticism about this. I think it's important to kind of think about the argument that's actually being made when you talk about abortion rights being kind of like a plot of some kind to engage in population control, which is like what you're concretely saying to women who seek abortion care is that they might be manipulated into causing harm to themselves and their families when they're exercising their own choices. And in its most extreme form, like, what you're saying is that this is the Black genocide myth, right? That like Black women are somehow being manipulated by white women or the white supremacist government to perpetuate a genocide against their own children, which is like an insane paternalistic thing to say that I think, at least in my reading of people's responses to this, is like it's a racist trope that like people are not in fact able to make their own choices. And so I think there has to be like another side of the argument, which is that it is true that people have a very complicated relationship with the American healthcare system, such as it is. It's also true that people are agents in their own lives, and that when you seek abortion care, you are a full adult who knows what you are doing. And talking about it as accessing healthcare and making a decision with all of the when we talk about accessing healthcare, we have patients' bills of rights and so on and so forth. And so I think framing it as more of a holistic matter of health and the rights that patients have to not be abused and so on is a step forward that I would make in that discourse. And I think there's just some danger in like conceding to the point that when women make decisions about their healthcare, that they don't in some sense know what it is that they're doing, or that somebody else is directing them.
Before you go, Pascal, Dr. Condom washing Queen of Missouri has not weighed in yet.
I think I have, at the risk of sounding like I'm oversimplifying things, I think, a bit of a darker take on things. I think from a historical perspective, and this is something I'm like a field of literature I know very well, the link between eugenics and birth control is really undeniable. In my own research and in lots of other important research that's come before mine, I think it's impossible there's an inextricable link between the birth control and kind of white women's rights movement and eugenics and all of those things. That being said, change does happen. I don't know if I would call it progress, but I would call it change, and that we can acknowledge the roots of the really racist and problematic roots of like Margaret Sanger's actions, and still acknowledge also that she did do some things that are important, and we need to kind of build on that, if we're thinking through this reproductive justice framework, access to abortion, if we treat it as not just a right, but as part of treating an entire person holistically, it's normal, essential health care, then we move beyond whether somebody is systematically trying to destroy an entire community. Instead, we're focusing on human beings as whole individuals, worthy and deserving of the full kind of expression of healthcare. That makes sense.
What I wanted to interject, Jason, I know you probably have some really interesting thoughts as well, right? Is that I think both of you, thank you very much for your commentary. Lillian, you made a very, very, very interesting point that made me ponder the gender consequences of nationalism and community identification. And what do I mean by that, right? Ultimately, the anti-abortion rhetoric used by both the Black nationalist types or white conservatives is about the argument that the womb of individual woman is the property of communities or nations. Yep. Because if you really take let's talk about the eugenics birth control argument, and let's talk about the argument of those who are saying that this is racialized population control, right? Let's assume that it's true, that it was. What if a single Black woman who doesn't want to have a child simply says, and so what if it is? What does that have to do with my individual desire as a human being to decide what I want to do with my fate in my capacity to have this child? And why do you think me having melanin in my skin gives me some kind of fiduciary obligation to facilitate your fear about what you may or may not justifiably believe is some conspiracy to diminish numbers of people with that melanin? So what I'm saying is that there is an assumption that, and you can make the argument with the white Christian who would make the same argument, but in a different racialized way. So the assumption of those arguments is that the individual right of a woman to determine her personal destiny is secondary to the agenda of the nation or community. I'm not saying I'm making an opinion of whether I agree or disagree. I do have my opinions, Joe. But I think that we really need to frame what this discourse is about in those terms. And I'd like you ladies to correct me if you think I'm incorrect in framing the discourse in those terms.
In terms of whether or not, like a conflict between how people think about the individual woman and what she and her womb may or may not owe a community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're looking at a kind of a Manichaean kind of a binary here of a woman's individual choices versus the collective obligations of population determination, whether growth, shrink, or whatever. And why exactly is that burden always on the woman and never discussed in terms of being on the man?
Sarah, do you want to take that one on?
Well, I think kind of across the board, in basically every context I can think of, men are just sort of the hit and run, and so because of the sort of biological connection between the mother and the little creature growing inside, the men are always going to be like not central to that debate. It doesn't have to be that way, but I can't think of too many examples where men are playing a central role in abortion and reproductive health debates, and that is a problem, a separate but related problem.
Well, let's bring up some terms that you talk about in your paper, Lillian, that you're very well written.
Thank you.
Dense.
Dense as fuck. Is that? Yeah.
Dense as fuck.
There it is.
Daff. It's a daff paper, not daft, but daff. It's dense as fuck. There's some terms that you use that, maybe everybody listening don't know. And there's one, we tried to talk about it on the show a few months back, and it just got totally derailed and we couldn't even get into the conversation. Natalism.
Ooh.
And Neo-Malthusianism.
Malthusianism.
That's what I said. Why are you always correcting me?
Do you want me to expand upon these?
If you could explain, yes, because we're going to be going back to these terms because I think we're kind of teetering on hitting on these things, and I don't want to just jump into Pascal pontificating about natalism and then people going, "What the hell is he saying?"
Yeah. So I was going to say, I think that what Pascal. Oh, wait, Marcus, were you going to jump in?
I was just going to say there's some young people that watch this show, and so if you could explain it as if you were explaining it to a child, so that that the audience can understand. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so I think what Pascal is saying is kind of wading into a discussion about why it is that either communities or states become very invested in population policy or population control in some way or another. And there are kind of two ways in which I've kind of two different ways in which this can happen, generally speaking. You could have it's called pronatalism. So like you want more babies. Okay. You want like the people in your community to have more babies, and based on what Pascal was saying, you could say that, a white supremacist might want more white babies, a Black nationalist might want more Black babies. And like, there is something that there's an incentive to grow the population, to preserve it, to procreate. And this can become very straightforward. Like, we are in a population decline, and right now we have a low birth rate. We want more babies. It can also become very ideological in the aforementioned ways. It can also be the other side to the story is what I call Neo-Malthusianism. And for like a lack of, you could just say it's anti-natalism. Like, we want to stop a certain population from having babies or from procreating too much. And this comes from a economic theory that was very influential for hundreds of years and continues to be for whatever reason, which is that part of the problem when it comes to using too many resources or providing services, part of the problem is that it's not scarcity or artificially created scarcity by a capitalist economy. It's that there are too many people. So these arguments get played out all over the world. It's like you can talk about population increases as being like the reason we have climate change. There's too many people and we are creating too much waste. We can talk about, you might say that poor people are just using too many social services. We don't have enough tax dollars to go around and take care of all these lazy poor people, and we need them to stop having babies. So there's a certain way in which in capitalist societies in particular, the size of the population becomes a kind of object of concern. And like historically, Thomas Malthus had an economic theory where basically population cycles, population growth and decline were part of the kind of natural cycle of life, or the natural way in which economies changed over time. So you'd have a growing population because you have better technology, better tools, you can make more stuff, you can produce more, you can provide for more people. But then at a certain point, there are too many people. So that you'll fall into crisis, and then there will be some kind of decline. And this is how people thought the economy worked until the capitalist period, in which it's clear that we just increase labor productivity all the time. Population continues to increase, although not so like steadily, but we can provide for way more people. And the question becomes like, how do we care for all of these people? Like, what do we do with this surplus population? People who are disabled, people who can't fit into the workforce for whatever reason. Maybe they need to have a child, they need to care for the elderly, hurt on the job, something like that. There becomes this question of like what to do with all these people. And the response of states can, under certain conditions, be, well, we need to control the population. Like, to be able to afford more, we need to have less people to deal with. And that's what I would say, in a nutshell. It can take on a very racist character, but it is always and everywhere like an anti-poor people campaign. Like, if we can get them to control their procreation, then they'll stop hoarding resources. So when people say Malthusian or Neo-Malthusian population control, if you ever read articles about this, that's kind of what they're talking about. So there's a lot of nuance there. I see some people kind of chatting up about it in the chat, but I'd say that's like the basic idea, that there's pronatalism and antinatalism, and at different times and for different reasons, they can become influential.
What's fascinating about Malthusian philosophy and theory, I always find, is that this is something that comes out of like the late 1700s, early 1800s, right? So yes. What's fascinating, right, is that how the world wasn't even remotely close to the population levels that we are now. And we have Western philosophical ideology coming out of England, not surprising, that's already talking about limiting population.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, one of the big things that I'm puzzled by is, so here's something that, just to like back up, the literature that Sarah was, referencing and talking about population control and eugenics and the relationship with birth control and kind of middle class reform movements that basically tried, like, what do we do with all these poor people? How do we control their procreation? What I find really interesting about these kinds of responses is that the Malthusian story is literally anachronistic. Like, it's something that holds in a pre-capitalist economy when you did have these kinds of crises and cycles of population growth and decline. And like, capitalism is such a different kind of economy. And so it's like a theory that was kind of making sense of a different period in history is constantly like re-energized to make sense of what to do about poor people now. And I'm interested in why that is, why this like attempt to control the population by some means, state policy or just, you know, soft forms of coercion can become so attractive to in capitalist societies. Like, why is that the answer? And I think part of it is that I think someone was writing in the chat that you have this population of people that gets made a surplus. They're not productive in the economy, or you have indirect pressures on the state to like become really proactive when it comes to reproductive policies. Like, you know, if you have an aging population and you don't have enough tax revenue to take care of them, suddenly it's like, we need more people paying taxes. Like, we need more income. We need more people in the workforce. We need like, and, you know, or you have problems with like, or the labor market is really tight and you need like people there's not enough employment. And then you suddenly are like, we need less people here because we're over, like, we can't afford to expand social services or whatever it is. And then we need to kind of discourage people. So there's this kind of push and pull in capitalist societies that creates, I think, like constant anxiety over like fertility and the shape of the family. And I think that it can create like different, both from the bottom up, like conservative movements that like try to control the population in one way or another, and from the state, from the top down. And so this whole thing about like just individual choice and liberty, it needs to be seen as like a part of this ongoing dynamic and these pressures. And the only way to deal with it, in my opinion, like from a socialist perspective, is in a similar way that you would deal with other problems. The structural problem, what is going to lessen these contradictions? What is going to create more social support? What is going to create less anxiety about family and fertility and so on? And I think that's like, I'll stop here, but I think that this is like what's really missing in our discourse, is that like we talk about this as pro-life versus pro-choice, or even white feminism versus black feminism. There is a structural problem in our society, and like it creates these political convulsions around the family, and we have to solve those problems. And I don't feel like that's like primarily how we talk about this.
You know,
And
there's
Sarah-
a term
hold
for
on.
that structural problem. There's a term for it.
What's
It's called
that?
capitalism.
Right.
Oh, I don't have that. Sarah,
I
would
wanted
you like
to.
to pile on?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to say that I do see this as a particularly capitalist problem, but I think the impulse to control population, whether it be to encourage mothers to have 12 kids and then give them a statue and a reward, as they did in the Soviet Union, it's not just a capitalist thing. I think it's a very much a product of modernity, of the modernizing impulse. The state, the reach of the state grows and grows, and it wants to kind of optimize the labor potential and reproductive potential of people within those.
I mean, we did a whole show on Soviet Union era art that was based on the image that you're just talking about, the woman, the mother with all the children and working in fields at the same time.
So I think people are, regardless of their ideological affinities, there's just kind of a general human thing where states seem to, in the 20th century, really want to closely regulate reproduction. That being said, it becomes a lot more problematic in a capitalist world. Why? Because capitalism, as we all know, is bent on exploiting labor and optimizing labor at the cost of individual wellness. And so what would have been, you get these, as Lillian was discussing, these like surplus populations. Modernity says, if you can't contribute to the economy, you're a waste of space. If you have a disability, if you're unable to work because you're pregnant, if you're elderly, if you're young, you're basically you're a drag on society. And capitalism kind of really plays into that by making those people seem like they're the problem when, as Lillian said, it's the system that's the problem. Why do we even have individuals who are problems? No individual should be considered a problem. It's a system that doesn't value them that's the problem.
That's a really good interjection. And by the way, I really respect and admire your correction of my assertion that capitalism is the structure that causes this. Maybe we should say this is a product of materialist dialectics, i.e., concern about material, because we can see how in even pre-capitalist societies, right, civilizational empires, the Babylonians, the Romans, when you have worries about the census and worried about the population relative to the census and how that's going to affect the economy, and these are pre-capitalist societies. So I appreciate the correction that maybe this is not a capitalist thing, but maybe this is about dialectical materialism and its effect on how we perceive population growth. Or I kind of wish my man Gene Bajnan was here because we can go into this conversation. Is this a project and product of the conceptualization of the nation state?
So I think that Sarah's really right about her intervention there, that like this isn't just a capitalism problem. I think that I would just put it, like, just to put a finer point on it, I think that's actually a helpful thing to think, because you are in a better position to say, okay, this is a problem that states, and as Pascal, you're saying, a nation state, like a geographically organized state, where like you have, people are paying their taxes. It's like responsible for, providing certain services. It's the thing people start to look to make demands for justice and social inclusion. So there's a particular kind of state. And it might not be the case that in a different economy, all of these contradictions and problems go away. And I think they exist in their different reproductive abuses, by the way, that existed before any of that stuff as well. Like it's not like pre-capitalist societies were great to women and then suddenly now we've got problems. Having said that, I do think there are kind of specific, the patterns I was mentioning, that oscillation between pronatalism and antinatalism and the specific pressures that get put on capitalist states, and how like changing conditions of capitalist economies kind of disrupt the way that people expect to be able to reproduce their own lives and their families. And then like that, then the kind there's going to be a characteristic set of conflicts and patterns around this that are, I think, distinctly capitalist. But I think of that as like a compliment to what Sarah's saying, because I think it just helps nuance the issue. Like, what is it about capitalism that creates these anxieties here, and you can anticipate them in a crisis or whatever. And I think part of that is definitely the nation state, that like you have a territory that is governed by a body, and it is where people look to make demands in the public sphere for social protection, to secure their rights. And then it starts to have its, and on the basis of what it's concerned with, like I was saying, tax revenue or whatever, there's going to be a push and pull of like how the kind of posture the state takes towards families, towards women, towards reproduction. And I think it's all very complicated, but I think that that's like the right train of thought to have.
I'd like to I'm really glad you guys are here, because this is getting kind of deep, and I kind of like that. This is really interesting. But this is going to be a serious intervention here. Counter argument. If we assume, as those who believe that if we're going to have nation states, that nation states should provide goods and services to the population to ameliorate and or diminish social harm, social dislocation, i.e. healthcare, quality public education, housing, quality food, child care. Let's assume that we all agree philosophically that we want a nation state or some governing entity that provides those things to make a more humane environment. Why can't that nation state use Rousseauian social contract theory to say that, fine, you want that? Well, guess what? Part of the social contract in that is that we have to determine your population growth, how many children you can have, how many babies you can have, and what exactly. In other words, you want us to provide fiduciary services to you, but we're going to have and able to afford this and maintain this, require fiduciary responsibilities to you in terms of how many kids you can have,
like the one child policy, like the one child policy,
things of that nature. What is the response?
Which Sarah's an expert on. She was there in the fucking house, before and after. I want to hear what you have to say about this, Sarah. Since Pascal.
I mean, it's not my answer is not a pleasant one.
That's fine.
I think, I mean, that's I don't agree with it, but I think the argument that because the state provides social services, I can understand why the state actors would say, we provide social services to make your lives so great and convenient and free of harm. Therefore, we can regulate the kind of people who are reproducing and how they're reproducing and under what circumstances. I could see that argument appealing to a lot of people. It doesn't appeal to me, but I think there's, I wish I can think of a lot of examples of states that said just that.
Not Lillian, Marcus. Sorry, Marcus and Lillian. I get you guys confused. Do you?
Easy to do.
It is. Well, I mean, that's something where, like,
Lillian, I don't see color. That's why.
it's the black hair. It's similar.
Black hair. That's all it is. Yeah.
I mean, and like with that type of thing, I like just going off of, I don't know, principles I like to live by, and I think we need to be working towards. It's like this whole thing is like has to deal with like focusing on like what are like the power dynamics, and like not necessarily like is a nation state or some group trying to impose less babies or more babies, but it's more about the ability for individuals to impose that on people. and I mean, where I'm very much interested in, is like I'm just gonna try and left turn out of here, is some of what Lillian was talking about is like where the left needs to go, and the way that we need to start organizing, mobilizing programs and policies in order to actually get to the crux of the issue. And when somebody was saying earlier about what was it, the undue burden, in a way that like it affects the structural levels, like the hey, the walls in every clinic that performs abortion has to be 13.5 feet, and there must be a window every, all these types of things that go into it. And then you find yourself focusing on like, well, did we build enough windows, or are we organizing in as this policy area to say the window requirement goes away? And I think Lillian did a great job in the article of saying like this is kind of a futile effort where we're a lot of times just spinning the tires, launching mud. And there could be a more direct, way of like tying abortion to just universal health care. But I guess my question is there another step that you think the left could take, which would be, protecting, clinics that perform safe abortions now, but then also like securing development networks where, if people can't access abortion in their locality, regardless of how much they can afford, can they, can someone pick them up and, take them, give them time, give some money to get time off? Are there other like networks and programs that you think would be beneficial? And also too, is like some of these things already exist. So I'm not trying like to invent it.
And how much of a lot of the conversation that we see around abortion and even reproductive rights is kind of performative? And that's one of the things that
let me get my pink hat.
Reading your piece definitely made me think about was kind of the performative nature in which we talk about the upholding of Roe, when there are several states that have rolled back abortion rights to the point where we are seeing women facing prison time for being pregnant during car accidents, falling downstairs. Recently, but a few years ago, a woman got shot and the baby died, and because there was so much pushback, they ended up taking the arrest away. But the woman that was shot was arrested because she had got into a fight while pregnant.
So I got so absorbed in that story that I forgot the initial question that you asked. And I'm sorry. I started thinking of places like that.
I was actually trying to just expand on not only just not focusing on these those minor issues that kind of get caught up in like this Roe issue, but like the development of programs and policies on the left that actually cut to the core of what the issue is.
Right. So there's not an easy way to do that. I mean, I think that the first step is, at least for people on the left, is ideological reframing. Like, I mean, that's why in the pieces that I write, I'm so obsessed with like the structure, both the macroeconomic structure that causes many of these problems, but also the structure of like what we are all doing. Like when we say we're defending abortion rights or reproductive justice or reproductive rights, this in the public sphere, like what I see on Twitter or the people I talk to at meetings or whatever, the New York Times, the opinion pieces, we have these ideological battles. So in the public sphere, we're having an ideological battle between pro-choice and pro-life. And then on the liberal left-wing milieu, we have an ideological contest between pro-choice and reproductive justice. Okay, and then we have so we have these like different ideological alternatives, and they kind of shape shift. Especially the conservatives, like the pro-life discourse has changed dramatically. And then, and I also think on the pro-choice side, there's more adoption of like, as I wrote in my piece, decentering abortion by emphasizing other social services that maybe NGOs or Planned Parenthood provides. Anyway, so there's this ideological battle about like what we're fighting over. And this is known as the culture war at the top. Okay. And then within the left, we kind of have a culture war that is both substantive and cultural. Like we, on the one hand, like see the shortcomings of the pro-choice framework. And like culturally, we want to contest that with better ideas. But the thing that never happens is what is the structural nature of the problem? And I was talking like big picture, like abstract and more densely about capitalism, but literally we're talking about a political terrain that is just dominated by a nonprofit industrial complex, which is just like, no matter what your ideology is, whether you're pro-choice or reproductive justice, you're all doing the same shit. You're all have the same kind of service-oriented, electorally driven, community organizing, the kind of bastardized Saul Alinsky thing that we all do now. Like this is what politics is. And none of this is capable of doing anything but being defensive in the face on the onset of attacks. So that's like when we start asking, I think we spend a lot more time than we should kind of some of the ideological battles have actually been won, and we spent too much time litigating those. So most of the American population is already pro-choice. And most of the reproductive rights world is already sympathetic to or adopting the framework of reproductive justice. And nothing is changing. So there has to be like a more political analysis of what to do. And that is kind of like, and who are your opponents? Why are they so well funded? Where are they coming from? Why is our only political like defenders? Why is Planned Parenthood my political advisor as opposed to my healthcare provider? I mean, these are the questions that I feel like get lost in the morass of culture war stuff. And so that's point one. So like, what can we do is like, the first thing is to get a grasp on the problem. And then the second thing I think is to take stock of like the last time people got a grasp on the problem, what did they do poorly? And maybe they didn't foresee the unintended law of unintended consequences. It's not necessarily a criticism. It's just, this is what happened. Feminists wanted independent clinics because they couldn't convince hospitals, a lot of Catholic hospitals or whatever, to train people to do abortions. And they also wanted, at the time it was like in the 60s, it was like community control. We want control over our own clinics, women providing healthcare to other women in a male-dominated field. And at the time that made sense. Now we have a institutional problem where these clinics are extremely vulnerable, beg the Democratic Party for funding and from private donors and so on, and and now they're like the epicenter of this like weird and violent militant conservative movement. And so that didn't go well. And so whatever conclusion that we need to draw, whether it's expanding access to health insurance, bringing it structurally into the mainstream of the healthcare system, like literally normalizing abortion, I think that's like, I don't know what that would look like exactly, but I feel like those are the kind of thoughts that like could be out there.
Well, you talk about this in your piece, and I thought that was actually really interesting about kind of the normalizing or attempt to normalize the conversation of abortion as part of healthcare. And on the left, I think a lot of us go, yeah, of course. But when you got more in depth with that part, and you're like, well, when you hear abortion clinics try to defend themselves, they don't talk about being abortion clinics. We're like, no. We're not just for abortion. We do pap smears and we hand out condoms and needle exchanges. Like, don't think this is the abortion place. This is the everything place. And it does kind of eliminate and put abortion back to that dark corner of discourse. I did find that interesting. Marcus, did you?
Oh no, I mean this is like, I think to exactly that point, just hitting on what I was saying is that, and I think I've even met like one of the former directors of Planned Parenthood in my former life, and that's what it is. It's like, I was like a staffer, so that's what it is. Like they have the access, and it's a very much dedicated relationship between Planned Parenthood and the Democratic Party to, do the work of saying, as Kamala had so effortlessly and perfectly put it. But that's all you get, right? Is they talk about all the things that they're doing, and like I'm happy too is that Lillian had framed it in such a perfect way of saying like they show that they're good for abortion rights by saying all the things that they do other than abortion, and that's where too it's like I think we're saying no, this is a clinic that does abortion, and I think that people who actually go to clinics to try and like do anti-protesting, people who put themselves in between people who are just trying to access healthcare, that is also good, and I think it's a very front-facing way of showing like public that this is something like an issue that is about healthcare, right? If you're going to do some type of action or anything like that for Medicare for all, is abortion wrapped into that and a dedicated process? Because at this point too, it's like it needs to be overstated because of where our society is, and it would be nice if it didn't have to be that way, but that's kind of where we are now.
My question is Lillian, I get the sense that you're saying that part of the problem is that this issue has been poorly politicized, and my question is, maybe we should think about depoliticizing the whole subject. I've always believed, in my personal opinion, on the subject of the abortion, is that why are men even talking about this in a political framework when this is about the choice of women and their bodies and actually better, and their health care? And maybe part of the better consequence of us pivoting to Lillian's framing of this as a healthcare choice is that would possibly lead to a depoliticization. Anybody have thoughts on that?
I only reason I'd say no is just because I mean healthcare is politicized as well. You know, I don't think it's like we can't just hell like what's not politicized. You know, Disney characters,
Disney characters are
Candy,
M&Ms.
Candy not being Candy not being sexy enough. Like it.
You know,
if I can't
fuck my candy, I'm pissed off.
Yeah, I think it could have happened maybe 20 years ago. You know, like 30 years ago. I don't know, but I feel like my entire life, as soon as you say abortion, you know, there's teams and there's parties involved, and like at the end of the day, only one of those teams is actually successful in changing material reality, and it's very much on the back of politics. So like I don't know.
Does the panel think they're just right? Has too much of a powerful say so in even the conversation? Because I think that has a lot to do with the left or even the liberal class that pushes back on abortion clinics and more on public health clinics. I think that has to do with a fear of losing power in certain voting bases. What say you, panel?
I think they do have far too much power. Yeah, they really do. I think that something that I think is true about the abortion rights, or the anti-abortion movement. I think that this is the most successful right-wing political movement of the neoliberal era in terms of its level of organization, cohesiveness, ability to shift ideologically and discursively, like retort. I mean, they well-funded, the militancy, and the level of success, almost uncontested success. So I think that yes, they have a lot of power, and it's minoritarian. I don't believe that most people agree with this, but I think that it's the reason why I think maybe I think the goal is to depoliticize abortion, like to make abortion normal. It would have to be a normal part of going to the doctor, and that's what we want for everybody. So I think that in that sense, I agree. I just think that given that this movement persists, that it's not going anywhere, even if they win at a federal level and revoke Roe, like this North Carolina group called Love Life, they just set up a huge office and have a congregation now that meets sporadically in Manhattan, and they're from North Carolina because they're so confident they're winning in North Carolina that they're moving into New York. And that's going to be a long battle for them. New York is very liberal. Roe isn't going to be overturned in New York. But this isn't going away. And because it's not going away and it needs to be confronted to, build it into a different program, I just feel like being there's probably a way to finesse it to get people on board with a vision for like healthcare reform or whatever. But I think hiding it or not making it political is a mistake because, and I've written this elsewhere in a Jacobin piece, I think that it can kind of be the Trojan horse where it's like, you want to include abortion in a Medicare for all bill? Well, you could pass it if only you take that out. And that's going to be the thing that stymies the whole thing. And that's not good. I don't think that's
what a great fundraising tool Roe has been too, because I think, and this is just my opinion, and you guys can tell me to go F off or if you don't agree. I think Texas is a perfect example of the far right taking over and how the GOP is not fans of the far right taking over, because the pushback that the GOP got when that abortion bill passed, the fundraising dollars the Democratic Party was able to generate when that abortion bill passed, they became the boogeyman that will energize a defeated base without Trump. The religious zealots, totally energized so many people in Texas.
I wonder though, like how much is it going to matter? As like we get into like, hey, what is just even like the ability of the Democratic Party to do anything about it even if they win, right? And like we
Mhm.
are living through it now. And I got a question too, because when you're talking about like the religious right and their power that they've accumulated, I think bringing up a great point of like groups willing to go to New York, saying like they don't quit, they don't quit. And I wonder if anyone else would agree. Is like, do you think abortion is what is like the hinge point for the like Federalist Society to actually get to the point where they're handing over a list of these are the names that you're going to put on the Supreme Court, and then bing, 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 they just go down the line. I wonder if decades ago, like, I don't know if like they knew it, but this is one of those things where, yeah, they were able to say within the judiciary, this is the issue that we are going to derive our power from. And what, 6-3 court on the Supreme Court now, and what, 3 or 4 of them handpicked from the Federal Society. Like, I don't know if it's a question. I'm just like, I guess I'm just like realizing this in my head and saying E.
Well, I mean, I
anyone else
definitely think this is something that becomes heavily politicized during the Reagan era, but I don't think that was the major pivot point for the reactionary right in the 70s. I think that the falling rate of return from the corporate world and the decrease in popularity of corporations in the business sector, particularly when we see the rise of the Powell memo in the early 70s, was more of the actual grounding for the reactionary right. But I find that the way in which abortion and race are used is that they make very effective emotional points of contention to rally people around, when in the end, the actual major driving force behind this is to roll back the gains going back to the New Deal, and as well as fracturing the New Deal Civil Rights Coalition, and also using the alleged social harm from the women's rights movement to create a culture war, when in reality this is all rooted in a kind of preserving a certain type of capitalist realism in the end, rooted in a kind of traditional white male patriarchal paradigm.
Yes, I think that that's a really important point, which is that I said something on Twitter recently, and some people were, in a friendly way, were like, I'm surprised at this because I think this is not a culture war issue. And like part of the thrust of by trying to have a more materialist analysis of it, I want to push people away from thinking about it like that. Like at face value, it is about culture. Of course, it's about religion. It's about deeply held moral beliefs in the case of many, or at least some people, on both sides. But these politics are not reducible to that moral orientation or perspective on the world. Like the abortion rights movement. So first of all, like evangelicals, these people, these fanatical, politicized evangelicals around this issue were not always political in this way. It is a legacy of the, resistance to desegregation in the South. So how do you get people on board with a states' rights program who are not political? Well, you make it about abortion, which is why you had this huge anti-abortion campaign in the early 80s during the Reagan era, because you have these people that are like, listen, we want to have a states' rights program and we can't have a pro-segregation program. How do you kind of like create maintain the political logic? And that's why the abortion rights movement took on a state-by-state strategy that it has, which has been very successful. Having said that, it's just because it was one thing once doesn't mean it's the same thing now. But that's just to say, there's this kind of thing where we talk about like in the US, is because it started as one thing, it has to be, the same kind of thing. And there's certainly still white supremacist elements in the movement. But I wouldn't say segregation is like the issue at this time. But it is like it became that logic of protecting the state by state strategy. That's where it comes from. So the idea that this is like somehow just about culture, it's about weakening the power of the federal government to enforce certain kinds of reforms. And of course, this has to do with the New Deal and access to basic goods and services, because the first thing they did was outlaw federal funding for abortions through the Hyde Amendment. And so once that's in place, you weaken the power of the federal government to actually provide for these rights, to make it accessible. And then you also, on a state-by-state basis, start to erode them from the bottom up. It kind of exposes the weakness of the federal structure and the weakness of like the redistributive capacity of the American state. And so like, for that reason, I just think like calling it a culture war issue, it's like, it just scratches the surface of the problem. Like there's layers to this that even if it's not your like main political beef, like it's not the thing that you work on, there's layers to this that tell you a lot about what American politics is like institutionally, I think.
Say it again for the people in the back.
I do want to bring up something. There's somebody that's asked this question several times, and we weren't trying to ignore you. There's a book that came out, I want to say last year, Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. And I think because the conversation came up about communist states, Soviet Union, China, and one-child policy, which definitely contradict some points in that book. Did you guys look at that book at all, or was that on your reading list, in your reading groups, in your book club, in your Oprah book club?
I didn't read the book. I saw the author being interviewed, I believe, on Katie Halper for a brief moment. I didn't really watch the whole show. Title is very catchy. So, don't know if I could give commentary.
I think Sarah's she keeps muting herself.
Sorry, I was going to jump in. I also have not read the entire book because apparently we don't do that in academia. We just read the spark notes. But it is a catchy title, and the idea, I guess, is that when you are having sex under socialism, it's all well and good because you know the state is going to provide health care, it's going to provide access to schools and social services that will make whatever the outcome of that sex act is, you're going to be taken care of, and so therefore you're going to have better sex. I mean, I think that that makes sense. Thinking historically, though, not so much in the present, and obviously this is different for different contexts, but like the Soviet Union and China never were able to provide the kind of free childcare on the scale that they proposed they would. So this idea that you can have as much sex as you want and produce little capital or little like laborers for the nation and not have to worry about that because the state's going to take care of you. Well, in both China and the Soviet Union, the state never actually could fully take care of the children that were born or the mothers who are having them. So ultimately, it ended up falling on the individual or on the family unit to provide those things because the social safety net simply wasn't there. So it's kind of interesting. I do think people would have better sex if they were actually being provided with those structural things, but history shows that it's failed time and again.
Well, from my understanding, there were advanced healthcare options in comparison to what was being offered in the West at that time, being presented by the Soviet Union at an earlier stage. The idea of, as a matter of fact, women's rights to choose and female participation in their healthcare rights, from what I've read, were more advanced in the early Soviet Union than you would find in the United States or some other capitalist countries. And correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, so the Soviet Union's interesting in that in the kind of early period, the kind of revolutionary period right after the Soviet Union became the Soviet Union, ooh, kitty cat, there was a lot of openness, and I would say that it was really the cutting edge in terms of women's participation in political life and in centering reproduction and reproductive rights or what have you. But then, because history is depressing. Under Stalin, it was like, okay, no, actually, this is too much. We're giving people too many options. We actually just want to limit access to birth control and abortion and have as many children as possible. And so there's been, both in China and in the Soviet Union, there's been kind of this back and forth, and not a consistent support for women's rights or for healthcare or for access to abortion, things like that. So there were high points and low points, in other words.
So sorry, someone was upset that we were not talking about the reasons why people get abortions, and I said something back.
Why would we need to talk about the reasons to try to say,
well, you know,
some are justified, some are not?
And I mean, I would have
poverty porn, right?
Yeah,
about poor black women and poor brown women. You know, that's not what we're talking about.
But like that's like also it's like used as a distraction point, right? They say like this is like let's like only allow these certain things, right? And like let me be invasive into these people's lives and stuff like that. When like no, we just need to be arguing for like actual liberty and self-determination, right? That's what we're trying to focus on.
Having a conversation about normalizing the word abortion and healthcare is way deeper than telling the same Precious story. I've seen Precious. I've seen Lee Daniels movies. Check them out if that's what you want to watch.
Which, and like that's the thing, is like that is the tactic of like the neoliberal order, right? Like is like that is like the Planned Parenthood MO is like they have these rallies, they find people who have gone through absolute terrible trauma, put them up on stage, say cry, tell your story, and then they say then they start passing around the bucket for donations. Like we need to
I mean, my response is that why do we have to means test our discourse about an issue that should be a fundamental human rights healthcare issue? Isn't part of the problem that we means test this as a kind of poor Latino women disproportionately need the access to healthcare or abortion because God knows we don't want that too many of them to be populating anyway. So I mean, why do we want to surrender to that kind of thinking? I think they're having a more broad conversation.
Also here, I'll add to the person's point if they want to have a deeper discussion. This is also where I wanted to go with the discussion because I, for a time, worked in the nonprofit / NGO world with the unhoused. Lillian, you talk about the fact that private industry pretty much runs these abortion clinics. And there's a problem when you have to deal with the NGO world. Do you want to talk a little bit about that chapter of your paper?
So I'll say something about the first point, because I actually think that the response you all gave to that question about why people get abortions is really important, because I think in a nutshell, I think Pascal is right, Jason's right, Marcus is right. Like the means testing access to basic social goods and services, like this has to stop. And it has to it's nice to have sympathy, but it also seems to imply that like if we all had great social services and all these things and we weren't poor, that women would stop having abortions. And that's not true. Shit happens. And it has to be a legitimate choice either way. So like, I think that there's some when people start doing that, I think there's some lack of moral clarity, but it also has the kind of insidious back logic of there's a world in which we could figure out who deserves access to this and who doesn't. And that's just never a game that the left is never going to win that argument. And it's also something that the right can do too. So something that's very popular right now on the right wing of the abortion issue is in their movement work, in their churches, they have speak outs, they have consciousness raising, all the stuff that the feminist movement used to do, they do it now. And they have pro-life feminists, and they have centering the voices of women of color, where they have a progressive stack of all the abortion survivors, and then they speak out at the church and they speak out at the meeting, and then they go up to them afterward and they you know, I've come around, I've seen the error of my ways, and so then it takes on this kind of like progressive veneer, and no doubt rooted in some real experiences, but nonetheless, like that kind of like moral back and forth about specific cases, and what if a woman is like this, and what if she's dealing with this? It's just not gonna. It's a non-starter, I think. And then like the NGO world. Honestly, it's a tough one, because the problem, I'll just set the problem up if people want to respond to this. When I talk about NGOs, I'm very frustrated because I think that they play a political role that is just not going to switch gears. It's not going to have a different political strategy than the one it has right now. It's very difficult to do anything independently of them. If you try to and you have a different strategy, you will find yourself disciplined by them, by their trolls on the internet or in person. People are loyal to the NGOs for really good reasons, like the fact that they are providing services that the state or the healthcare system can and should provide, and they're doing it instead, means that they are people's primary service provider. In a lot of instances, people really rely on them, even if they're not primary. So people want to protect these organizations for good reasons. The people who are working in them are often very committed and very well-intended.
Yes.
Abortion funds and people who are like, you know, driving people, I think as Marcus was saying earlier, across state lines to provide support. They're doing something really essential for people. So challenging them politically is not that easy, because you kind of have this like turf war almost, where it's like the strategy isn't working, but these are the people who, you know, there's kind of a in the trenches situation going on. And I don't know what to do about that. I just think I would like the problem to be admitted for what it is. And there's a lot of like moralistic baiting, where it's like, if you don't agree with the strategy, then it's almost like you aren't in the, it doesn't invite people with new ideas, because it's kind of like you're either in the trenches fighting it out with the right on a day-to-day basis and trying to provide basic services and trying to get money to do that, or you're not. And that is a world in itself. And there is a really good reasons why, from their perspective, people are doing the things that they're doing. So it's not that easy to argue with on a political basis. And I think that if people can kind of like take one thing away from this thing about NGOs, is that like it should become the beginning of a conversation about what to do about it is what has to happen. Because at the moment we kind of treat them like they're normal political actors. Like, you know, it's just complicated. That's all.
The NGO world is extremely complicated because, like you said, they deal with problems that most people don't see or want to see, like dealing with the unhoused and a lot of mental health problems, and dealing with the specter in the room that is abortion.
And I'm happy you bring up like unhoused too. So like it was like a lot of these like any like nonprofit organizations, especially ones that get to, you know, national status, you know, Planned Parenthood, Sierra Club, if you know, like for climate, you know, like these are these are organizations that like they're never going to find an idea outside of, you know, the framework of, you know, the society that we already live in, right? They're only going to be able to play by the rules that we are already given, and they're never going to really be able to push back and say, well, this whole system, the people who wrote the rules, right, the ideology that's driving these rules is wrong, and that's what's actually creating it. Like they can't ever come out of that process. And so like while there is a lot of good work that can be done, it's we have to understand the limitations, you know.
I wanted to interject because Lillian and everyone else, Jason and Marcus, are making important points. This is a major trigger element for me, because I've been talking about a long time. One of my main personal research areas has been about the use of, they weren't called NGOs then, but basically foundations and philanthropy, and basically social engineering Black politics and organizational movements and education. And I don't think there's enough discourse about how NGOs, the foundation world, what I call the left flank of capital, is really a social engineering tool of finance capital to control and manipulate social, political, and economic forecasting of the so-called left. It's been effective in doing that for over 100 years. And I don't think there's enough discourse in talking about how these things work in creating what I call the left flank of capital and why they are as much of a powerful tool in demobilizing our politics than even political parties.
And I mean, like, just to add on to what Pascal said, is like down to like these like pro sports organizations controlling what their children do in the time off. You know what I'm saying? How are like even sports leagues structured? What sports are available to communities? You know, all of these things. Like, how does the money flow? Like, down to just where do kids play? You know, these non-profit organizations have a role in it.
I mean, it's wild. I mean, like, part of the thing that kind of freaks me out about the NGO world is like how well it kind of accommodates the various emerging common sense around like critical thinking around an issue. So like I mentioned earlier that the reproductive justice framework has been very widely adopted as a critique of the liberal one in this discussion about abortion and abortion rights. I like others like think that it's a big, a significant ideological reframing. It's a more holistic and more anti-poverty centered way of thinking about these issues, which I very much agree with. But when that analysis takes root in institutions that are fundamentally able to do no different than any of the other institutions that you're criticizing, you're talking about a political dead end that is just mind-boggling to me. Like, I don't even know what to say about that, except for that at some point we have to kind of see the problem for what it is. And like I said, repeating myself, I'm not exactly sure how to do that.
It's when you're in that world. Another thing that I find fascinating is the fact that you're constantly fundraising.
Right.
You constantly have to raise money, and then you become kind of a slave to your donors.
Yep.
And you have to adopt the ideology of what your donors want, and it's not the other way around.
No.
So that's another kind of frightening thing about what happens when private interests are taking over a public good like healthcare. Let's get back to calling this healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, think about how many, like Planned Parenthood's relationship, for example, with Medicare for All is just very spotty. Like in some cases, they kind of endorse it, they like it, in discrete locales, but on the whole, they don't support it. Not because individuals in it don't. I don't want to be like unfair, but I think it's just like they can't support the policies that are needed to remedy in part. Not in part the situation because of the political structure they're a part of. And like, so debating with them about strategy is like really awkward. It's not like obvious how to proceed with that. You have to like push and pull and nudge and have meetings and try to kind of like, clinic by clinic, get them, at least in my experience, like get them to warm up to you and to try to like, it's just, it's a frustrating experience, and to anyone who's ever tried it, I'm sure.
No, it is, and we do have to say goodbye to Professor Sarah Mellors Rodriguez. She has some work to do at Missouri State. Duty calls. That's fine. We have Lillian here, and if you guys are listening to Lillian's voice and you're saying to yourself, This person has such a wonderful voice, and she speaks so well. She's so well spoken.
Oh, thank you.
It's because she has a podcast as well. What's Left of Philosophy. So we will put links up in the chat for Lillian's podcast if M. Toussaint has not already done that.
How's your podcast going, Lillian?
Good. I think we're all really excited that it's been as successful as it has been. I mean, it's a niche, like left political theory and philosophy, but it seems like people are getting a lot out of it, and we just have more and more ideas about what to do. So I think I'm really excited about it. It's been very rewarding, surprisingly.
Do people try to call you the female Ben Burgess?
Oh, no one's done that yet. Don't start it.
I will do that just to fuck with both of you.
Now that's gonna be. I can see it coming. You've laid the planted the seed. I'm gonna be.
Have you been on Ben's show?
Yeah, we talked about philosophy once. Yeah. No, I also did a call-in show with him where we also talked about Marxist philosophy. So yeah, we have a
Ben is on call-in now. So Ben has an alliance with Glenn Greenwald, and I'm making that up. Ben does not, and I hope I don't get a phone call from Ben later.
Oh my god,
Jason, heard you said
Now this type of lying in the liberal media that's going on in the United States.
You can't go around spreading that shit online.
Why not?
Ben does not have an alliance with Glenn Greenwald, but it would be funny if he did.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I'll be the derivative of Ben, the woman version.
The woman
taken
version.
from his rib.
Woman. Remember the $6 Million Man, Pascal?
I used to love that show when I was in elementary school.
And then they had Lindsay Wagner, who was the $6 million woman.
Bionic woman.
Well, she probably cost $6 million too.
Get it right.
Don't mess up. Go around making bionic chicks like that. This shit costs
Don't mess
money.
with my childhood, okay?
Women.
That hour of like the Fall Guy and the Bionic Man for Pascal was like the greatest hour ever. Much like Love Boat and Fantasy Island hour was for me.
I liked Fantasy Island better than Love Boat.
Well, you didn't like it when sometimes the same guest would be on both, like when Marsha Brady was on Love Boat and then Fantasy Island. You're like, how the hell does she do that?
Lillian is like, what are these old guys talking about?
Yeah,
I know. I'm reading the chat, and this person said the 70s rule, and I was like, yes, that is what is going on here.
It's early 80s, you dirty bastard.
Whenever they start going off in their like ancient, black and white programs and whatnot, you just start. This is the time. That's the time to scroll through Twitter. Scroll through Twitter, Scroll
through Twitter. Look at the chat.
Yeah.
Engage the listeners.
You got to let dad and uncle have their time to chat. And then
here's what you missed out on, you two young people. The Incredible Hulk was a TV show where Thor was a character that was like a pot smoking surfer.
What?
So if you watched old Incredible Hulk TV show, Thor would be like kicking back. Totally.
Thor, like the god, the Norwegian, the Nordic god, Thor.
He was the Nordic god of surfing.
I'm chilling with the dudes.
He was the Hulk, bro. Why you so down, Bruce?
Oh my god!
If you watch the old Hulk and when Thor would come on, you're like, dude, I may hate major corporations, but Disney did a great rebrand on that Thor.
What's crazy is like you're saying this, and I'm like, maybe there's this one. Have you guys seen there's a Norwegian show? It's called Ragnarok. I'm probably saying that super wrong. It's on Netflix. I feel like he's kind of like a Hulk Thor, the guy who like it's like playing out the Nordic mythology between like the clash between gods and giants. It's like a dark kind of Nordic vibe. Everything is slightly gray and blue. Like that's why I call it dark. But I feel like he's the main character, Thor, has a kind of similar vibe. He has to like, he gets too strong, has to like passes out, has to rip off his clothes,
That's what happens to me when I get too strong. I rip off my clothes, and then I look in the mirror and realize, that Black Panther fantasy faded all away. I'm not Michael B. Jordan at all.
I need to go back to Wakanda Athletics.
Yeah, I'm more Steve Urkel than Wakanda Athletics.
I mean, I feel like I got some there.
Someone,
It's the
Jan
most
said
pro-black gym
and
that
it-
you will ever see in the nation. No whites allowed.
No whites
Wakanda
allowed in
athletics.
Wakanda gym. No black dudes would go there.
See, we're having a multicultural experience now because this guy Jan in the chat said that we had this show in Germany in the middle to late '80s, so he can relate. See, you're resonating with people. And
See, people
in the
know.
chat.
People know.
Yeah.
And speaking of resonating, I woke up this morning, and before I logged on, I checked some emails. Dan Larson got back to us. He's going to be coming on the show in February, Pascal.
Well, all right.
We're probably going to be talking science fiction and the left and predicting the future with Dan Larson and Professor Michael Harris. Remember Professor Michael Harris that wrote the Star Wars book?
Yes, yes.
He had a new one recently come out, right?
Stay Alive, where he used something that should be in Lillian's wheelhouse. This is in your time frame. The Hunger Games as a analogy for collapsing societies.
Get the fuck out of
When do you
here.
have them scheduled for, Jason?
I haven't got the date booked down yet, but Dan got back to me, and he I'm excited. I love it when Dan comes. You guys don't know who Dan Larson is. He hosts Toy Galaxy, and if you want to take a look into my childhood, just watch any episode of that show. It is a look at pop culture, and Dan sneaks in very, 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 very subconsciously leftist critiques.
Ooh.
So I love Dan's show, and he's a great guy to have on the show. So Dan will be coming on. That's pretty cool.
So you can watch Scooby-Doo and then think about the rate of diminishing returns? I mean, at the same time?
Who doesn't do that? But you know what Dan, we do when Dan comes on the show. The first time he came on the show, we talked about G.I. Joe, right? And things like forced diversity. And does anyone know when G.I. Joe stopped fighting Cobra?
No.
When the Berlin Wall came down?
Yep.
What?
And they made a pivot.
Marcus,
And they
that
made a
wing did
pivot
help.
to environmentalism
Whoa.
because there
Marcus
was a
knew the
pivot
answer.
to the
Tell
environment.
you, Marcus. I'm impressed.
I could feel it, when I was like just shoving Honey Nut Cheerios in my mouth. I was like, something's going on here. Something's going on here.
The bad guy was gone, and the new bad guy was the environment, but from an individual level. And then you have a lot of other environmental shows like Captain Planet that say the environment is not a corporation destroying the world, but it is individuals that are destroying the world.
I thought you were going to say, you guys remember when G.I. Joe became black? That was like, oh, when did that happen?
Every black person on G.I. Joe talked like a stereotype.
Yes.
And they always made
yeah.
barbecue for no reason.
So, that's actually true. We do that in the military every day. Get off work,
Every day
have a
you
barbecue.
get up in the morning and talk like a stereotype. Man, there's these cobras out here. We got to shoot our guns.
As soon as I buttoned up that military belt, I was like, hey there, jive turkey. What y'all doing over there, honkies? I only could have a mustache.
Someone said Lillian and Marcus are next gen kids. They don't remember all this shit. Yes, caught.
Well, Lillian's even younger than Marcus.
How old are you, Marcus?
I'm
To put it
35.
in the private chat.
Oh.
Yeah, no. It's
Marcus lies about his age so he can sell.
Marcus lies about his identity.
Yeah, I don't want people to know who I am. Get out of here. I'm extremely paranoid. Are you kidding me? I used to work for the government.
That's why I live in Mexico. Ain't nobody coming here to find me. Them niggas ain't getting through Tijuana to find me. I'm fine. I live off a dirt road. I'm good. I'm talking all kinds of shit.
I asked some Germans recently, like I told some Germans that the American government doesn't keep track of you they can find you if they want to, but they don't keep track of you. Like every time you move house, you don't have to submit a new registration form with the American government, and that you basically, they kind of find you when you register to vote and stuff. And that's how you start getting called into jury duty and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
the Germans thought that was crazy. They were like, what do you mean you don't have to tell the government when you like move? You can do things without telling the government where you live and what you're doing? And it's just a different level of expectations about where what is appropriate, but they think it's wild that people can hide out.
You were like, it's not the Stasi anymore, buddy.
I was sensing a little anarcho-com in you, Lillian. What's up?
What's up? Wait, what do you mean? Why?
Anti-statism, anarcho-communism in you a little bit there.
You know, I'm gonna admit it. I'm hesitating, but when I'm around Europeans that just like bootlick like the government, they're just like simping for bureaucracy. It's a stereotype, but it's true. They like love rules, you know, and if you break the rules, no one has any sympathy for you because you should have followed the rules. I just feel like that's like not how I like hating the government is like a big part of my life. And, you know, as an American.
That sounds lame. That sounds like a bunch of dweebs.
So if I'm I feel like if I'm in the US, I'm always making an argument in a lot of cases for like more state capacity. Like the state is so dysfunctional, it can't help anybody. It ruins everyone's lives. It's a parasite. It abuses people, provides no good and almost all bad. And that's why everyone hates it. But like in Germany, I'm like, why is everyone following all the rules? Like you should try to get around the rules a little bit. Like what is all this just waiting for the government to tell you what to do? So I do feel like there's a little split consciousness going on there. Yeah.
Well, you're
in Germany
down here where there aren't a lot of rules.
Just shoplift. Germans just shoplift a little bit. Just break little rules. It'll be fun.
I'm not gonna say it.
Nazis in the face. Smack some Nazis in the face.
Smack Nazis.
You know something I did do that was nice in Germany, just a little off topic, but also pleasant. I went to the Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht annual memorial march. The whole left in Germany gets together and marches to their gravesite and lays flowers on their graves and mourns the martyrs. So that's something nice that the Germans do, just so I can be positive and not only critical. I never saw more Maoists in my life than at that particular march. But
did you meet the 99 Zu Eins guys?
I haven't met them, no, but I know about them. You know what? I put them on 0.8. You know, like on Spotify, you can kind of make the sound like a little slower. There's like a 0.8 setting. I put them on like 0.8 and I listen in German sometimes.
Oh, because they talk too fast.
I can understand a little bit, but my German's like intermediate, you know, so I need to like slow it down and it's not so distorted. So I do actually use them as practice.
Oh, so shout out to the 99 Zu Eins guys.
Yeah.
Bracken Z, what's up?
See, Alex, we're learning new things all the time. Like, someone says Spotify is canceled. Spotify is not canceled.
It's not canceled.
It's so there's a new clip up for those that don't know that cut of something I said about the Neil Young, Joe Rogan, Spotify debate. I don't really think it's a debate at all. Spotify, if you are a aspiring artist, is an extremely important platform for you to be on, because as much as I enjoy sites like Bandcamp and where I can actually earn real revenue on a site like Bandcamp as a musician, I only have a chance to truly blow up, so to speak, if I'm on Spotify and someone puts me on a curated playlist, because that's how most people listen to music. And we can get into another conversation, which we will be doing next month, about the music business, this Neil Young business, large hedge fund companies buying song rights, and how that affects the way you hear music, how festivals being taken over by major corporations affects the way you hear music and kind of music that artists create.
We bring Napoleon on for that?
Napoleon and I have had hours-long discussions about that, because most people there's a meme going around right now of I'll give you a little glimpse. There's a meme going on, and this is for you too, Lillian, of Neil Young, and it says ages 21 to 30 or something like this. Like, who's Neil Young? Ages 35 to 40. Fuck Spotify or something. And then the last one is like, what's the old people are like, you know, what's Spotify? So what's funny about that is it sounds funny to people that don't know dick about what goes on behind the scenes and who really makes money, because we are trapped in our own farts with these algorithms and
Yes.
these platforms. So before, when you had artists like Neil Young, Kiss, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, when records sold, what happened was people had to go to record stores and you bought all kinds of albums, sometimes regardless of genre. So so when you think of a movie like Eddie Murphy's first big film, and I'm going to stay within the pop culture lens so everybody can relate. Eddie Murphy, his first big film is 48 Hours. What is the song that Eddie Murphy sings when Nick Nolte takes him out of prison? The Police.
Wait, I know. Roxanne
By the Police.
Oh my God.
There is nothing about that song that should resonate with an urban Black audience. That was all Eddie Murphy.
I went to Catholic high school, man. I knew that music.
But that song was a large song. So what I'm saying is, as you get hit records, people go to record stores and buy other shit, right? I'm going to hear different things. MTV for a long time was just music videos. Granted, they didn't play a lot of Black people, if any, but still you could hear Prince and you could hear Duran Duran. Not the same genre.
Duran.
Right? So
did you say you like or you don't like Duran Duran?
I used to love Duran Duran.
I fucking love Duran Duran too.
Duran Duran is they have
See, there we go. I just made a music connection with you guys.
How do you even know who Duran Duran is?
Yes.
Her name was.
So here we're going to get into why she knows who Duran Duran is. So when you think about these artists of yesteryear that had these giant platforms, terrestrial radio, right? MTV, and a different type of concert promoter that wasn't corporate, that didn't use algorithms to curate shows, the Bill Grahams of the world. Now, if I like Duran Duran, I can fucking hear Duran Duran. And you know what I'm going to hear? All the other bands that sound like Duran Duran. Maybe I know, maybe I don't, but it's going to go in a loop. And now if I want to hear Eastern European polka metal only played on a harpsichord, I can hear that over and over again because of the algorithm. So a lot of the artists that people think that are doing well because they may show up a lot in your algorithm, because remember, this stuff is repeating on on your YouTube, it's repeating. It might even show up somehow on your Netflix. It's always repeating, right? You may think these artists are doing well. Now, I worked in the real world. All the major festivals in the United States, I did the numbers for. The largest festival in the United States is EDC. 175,000 people a day at a racetrack in Vegas. It's electronic dance music. It's an all ages crowd that doesn't do the same numbers, because we always look at dollar per head. So if you want to know who's a popular artist, ask someone that works in the industry and ask them what the dollar per head is. And you're only going to find a very, very small amount of people that even understand what that term means. So the dollar per head in EDC is nowhere near as high as Coachella, which is about 120,000 people a day. But where the dollar per head is very high is a festival here in California called Bottle Rock. It is a very, very niche, only 30,000 people cap. High-end wine, high-end food, and bands. You're like, I wouldn't pay $500 to see fucking Train. But you know what? The VIP area, the special VIP area where people that work there have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, because, you know, if you see Carlos Santana doing blow off a hooker's ass, they don't want you to fucking put that on Instagram, right? This $250,000, $100,000 for the VIP area, for the exclusive VIP area. Dollar per head, another level. The Fire Festival, which was a punchline for so many, was not a joke. It was not an anomaly. That is what music is going to look like. Easily consumable jingles, exclusivity, because I make more money with exclusive and VIP experiences.
I mean, I wonder too. It's like the only thing, anything that's real popular, that's like outside of just like regional popularity. If it's only going to be accessible like online, you know,
Yeah.
like yes, it's $30,000 to get in the door and see this live music, but hey, $5 on the metaverse, you broke bitch.
COVID
you
was
know,
a
it's like,
game changer.
God, that's so morbid.
I love it when
right?
when Jason gets into his pop culture.
But actually, I had
Wait,
a
but-
very
Go ahead, Micah.
well, I had a very interesting conversation with A1, who he's got a Netflix documentary. You know, there's tons and tons of music out. And talking with him, it's like if you're a musician, like you can't do, you know, it's like you just can't work on your music anymore. You know, like especially too, it's like if you're up and coming, you got to know music, you got to know social media, you got to know algorithms, you got to know when algorithms change. You know, you got to know like and all of these things that come on to it. But it's like, man, how much better of a rapper could be if he just can stick to rapping, you know? And not to say like, hey, if you want to do those things and enjoy them, but like it comes on with like these like basically these barriers to success, or these barriers to just having like being able to do it on your own, you know. And that's what I love like about Napoleon, rappers like A1, like who are like I've been able to live utilizing my music, you know. I've found a good fucking strategy to pay the bills, make music. And I mean, he's a guy that, I mean, he puts out like what, six albums a year.
Yeah.
But yeah, how does that look for someone that's coming up, you know, when they're like first looking out, like, I need to figure out these algorithms before I get, you know,
trip off this when it comes to the algorithm. And I want to hear what Lillian and Pascal have to say about this, because these are my Marxist friends, right? Neil Young, Paul Simon, and a few other extremely large artists sold the majority of their catalog to a music rights place, not rights, a music. I can't think of the word right now because I'm way too caffeinated. Neil Young sold his for like $150 million, and they overpaid. They gave him 22% more than what he would have even gotten for the next 3 years, because they're banking on the fact that this is kind of a recession-proof asset, that people will always need music. And now they have the ability, and the people that started this hedge fund also fought to really change certain laws for what kind of royalties you could get paid for more. And for years, the record industry owned the master royalty, which I own the masters, ergo I get more money. And this guy lobbied really hard to change that, so he could go in and then find these artists that have these large catalogs. And a lot of people know Michael Jackson did this with Beatles music, right? And not just Beatles music. He bought tons of music when it came up to auction, to the point where he owned like half a Sony or some crazy shit like that. He had that many music rights. Prince is another guy that comes to mind, right? Because he would never sell his music for advertisements. The moment that motherfucker dies, the estate sells it to Chase, and it's a credit card commercial for Let's Go Crazy. There's so much money to be made in placing that music. And the algorithms that get involved with that for sites like TikTok. TikTok is a massive site that is, you know, the breaker of all these trends. But there's algorithms within TikTok that say, well, if you want your music on TikTok, which is going to be way bigger, because you're never going to go platinum again. Never. Unless we ship you platinum. And that's very different than if you sell platinum. So you want to get on TikTok, you want to get in a movie, you want to get on commercials. That's how you're going to make money. That's how you're going to get on the festival circuit. Why do you think music festivals, for the most part, all the bands sound the same? Paul Toilette ain't sitting there fucking curating a festival and saying, I think 9 Inch Nails sounds really good with Tribe Called Quest. No. It's algorithms. It's consultants. It's gross.
So first of all, the chat loves Pascal's chair. People keep commenting on the chair. Second of all, I kind of want to. So this is fascinating to me. It's not a world I know very much about. But you said at the beginning that we're all just like smelling our own farts, and I didn't. And I wanted to know how you were coming back to that point. Like, how is all of this making us more like culturally siloed? Is that kind of like? Yes. Is that part of what you're?
Yes. Because go ahead.
I mean, like I think this too is like when you get into even like the genres, like this is before, online music, but it's like things going online, kind of like the things that like albums are able to do, kind of like hyper, or speeds it up, like it's Elon's Hyperloop.
It's MMAing of music, right? Mixed martial arts at one point in time, if you ever got into the first version before Dana White took over of UFC, it really used to be like a guy that was a bouncer, that was a brawler, and a dude that knew karate, and maybe a guy that thought he was a ninja, and one of the Gracies. So at some point, the Gracies started to dominate this weird fighting thing, and so mixed martial arts is just kind of an overly simplified wrestling, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and Muay Thai kickboxing that you can learn literally in a day or two. Almost like Krav Maga, right? It encompasses a lot of things, but it's really nothing specific. And that's how music has come. As I got older into my mid-20s and even my early 30s, I would ask people what music you listen to, and people used to tell you, I listen to this, I listen to this. Now what do people say? I listen to everything. Because your music sounds like everything. It's everything and nothing all at once. Country sounds like pop. Pop sounds like hip hop. Hip hop is pop. Where's rock?
True. That's true. Rock is not represented really.
Because it doesn't
I didn't think
sell.
about it that way. That's true.
I've been in the room where you start hearing people talk about what's the next festival. Guess what they don't want? Shit that don't sell. You know who sells? Lizzo. Because she's everything.
Ew.
You want hip hop?
Really?
She's hip hop.
Lizzo. Yeah.
You want R&B? She's R&B. You want entertainment? She's entertainment.
Going on.
I mean,
people love Drake.
I'm a rock, punk, metal musician that loves rock, punk, and metal. I love playing shit at the volume of 11 and breaking shit. I love it. I love it. I love it. I will never stop loving it. I will never stop loving it. I'm going to hang up this call and I'm probably going to go record some angry fucking music that 5 people will listen to. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Whoever said we need to get back into boom bap, look up Nejma Nefertiti. Okay, Nejma. Okay,
but I know the limitations of the genre financially, and how the powers that be that run festivals don't see money in it. That's why bigger rock and metal festivals are all overseas. There's an audience for it. There's a market for it.
Pascal, what were you going to say about this? I feel like I cut you off before.
I was going to say, right, that I really like when Jason gets into the pop music thing, pop culture thing. Number one.
No, it's deep.
And number two, right, is that contrary to the perception that I'm some kind of like curmudgeonly guy who doesn't like music and pop culture, that's not the way I traditionally was. I used to be really into movies, really into TV shows, and really into music. And what actually kind of took me out of that was in my 40s, after when I started writing for Black Agenda Report, I started doing a lot of reading into the utility of popular culture in capitalism. I started reading some Frankfurt School stuff, and I started particularly realizing how popular culture was working as a social engineering mechanism for not only Black people, but for Americans overall. And when I started to analyze how the shift from pop music in the 70s and 80s, from bands to soul to disco, goes to hip hop, which is actually cheaper for record companies to produce and higher profit margins, I started to really understand that, listen, man, there's no such thing as organic art in a capitalist society as financialized as the United States. It doesn't exist. And that one of the reasons why I'm not surprised by anything Jason is saying is that it really proves the point of understanding that I didn't really come to until I was in my 40s, that the notion that we talk on the show about capitalist realism, it's not a fantasy, it's for real, because it diminishes the capacity of art to have independent aesthetic value outside the market.
Now, I got a question though.
Mm-hmm.
Past that time period, Pascal, right, where you have this realization and, socialism ruins everything. Is there any time you heard like something came out, maybe a movie came out that you knew was garbage, but you're like, hey, I can just sit down, enjoy it for what it is and move on? Because like there's some, it's like, I don't know, I guess that I'm like having some trouble am I able to enjoy some of the things, oh, hey, a 2 Chainz song comes on.
Let me
Can
put
I
it a
still
little
enjoy
different.
it?
Okay, go, Lillian, spit.
No, let me put it a little differently. Like, I think I have the same question that Marcus has, which is like, and I even might put it a little more like provocatively about like some of the benefits of capitalist art, just to play devil's advocate, okay? Because I'll tell you a little story. I was in France with a Canadian friend, and this is a Canadian who very proudly hates America. God bless him. And he was going to France and was like kind of hoping to get away from American culture. He was like, I'm going to find the good French music and not go to bars that only play American stuff and so on and so forth. Upon finding this impossible, he's like, okay, listen, he was asking some guy at a bar, like, what do you listen to? Like, what is like the French equivalent of like Queen for like pop music? Does that exist? And this guy is like, non, ça n'existe pas. Like, because there is no Queen in France. Like, so there's some things that I think are genuinely enjoyable despite how and like well made. But maybe that's just like I'm not actually totally want to commit to that. I just think it's like worth popping a question if there's some, yeah.
You can like what you want to like. It's just interesting when you think about like when Pascal and I have these off-air conversations, even Napoleon and I have these off-air conversations about the way in which music gets created by aspiring artists, because you end up kind of subconsciously trying to follow these paths to fame and not necessarily trying to forge your own way. And that's why I was so into the idea of hardcore punk as asking the question, was it a countercultural moment because they were so against the authoritarian Reagan Thatcher regime that was coming up in the early 80s? Or is it more of a cottage industry that's just formed out of people trying to get their foot in the mainstream?
Yeah. Oh, and that's like some of they feel like is what makes like people like innovative. It's not so much like you take an instrument and say like, oh, what is like the normal way to play this instrument, and can I do that really well? Like versus like, what can this thing do, and can I just explore any and all possibilities that are within this one instrument? And it comes to like making like all versions of music, and like, but when you get to now, it's like people are looking at what makes money and how can I personalize that and then generate that say,
people
like, how
said
do I
that in the doo-wop era, right? The people definitely said that in the doo-wop era. You think every slick-haired Negro with a groomed mustache in 1957 just wanted to sing in front of a fucking burning garbage can with his homies in the projects? Or do you think, he wanted to make it big and sell out the Apollo? There's a reason why a lot of people pick up instruments And it ain't because they want to, you know, be the next Van Halen or write the great song. Sometimes people just want a way to meet people.
That's true. Musicians are always more popular. I'm always envious of my musician friends because they are by far so much cooler than me and have so many more friends that I lament my own not having done so. Why did I become a philosopher? That is the question.
It's never too late.
It's never, yeah.
It's never too late.
Someone says, when are you going to do a show about the hyper capitalism of Bay Area rap? I mean, I say it's rap as a whole. We did have an off-air Patreon only room discussion where I said I had my spicy Pascal quote where I said that Nas's Illmatic and The Chronic is a moment where hip hop makes a pivot to sell lifestyle. Hip hop becomes a lifestyle brand with those two records.
This is Revolution podcast has some of the best pop culture commentary on the internet.
But as I talk about metal and punk music, does anyone even know the records that are behind me? These are album covers behind me.
No.
It's the chat now.
No.
It's cool. It looks cool.
Lillian,
Art
you should know this.
looks
You're
nice.
white. This is supposed to come with you once you're born.
I did one time go see the Led Zeppelin houses in New York with my father, so I have some credibility here. I do know a few bands, that maybe 2 or 3.
Someone says yes. These are Bjork albums behind me. This is a wall of Bjork albums. I'm a fan of that odd-voiced Icelandic woman.
I would say, yeah, Icelandic is who they are.
99 bottles.
That is not her. That is Lena. They're German.
I know.
Is that like the one German song that people know globally?
Yep. I know.
Maybe
It was a du Haas. Is that the German guy? Du Haas.
Yes.
Yeah.
German.
Yeah,
band
that's
as well.
damn. Got it. What are they called?
Rammstein.
Rammstein. Interesting name. Sounds anti-Semitic.
I mean, that's something that's like I've had a conversation with like a lot of people. It's like punk, and I think even like with you, Jason. But like we're like, and it's and metal as well. Like so, there's like got to do some like deep research into any like metal band now to see. It's like, well, are they fashy? Are they not? Like, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, that's also part of that whole like, right? The hyper, the smelling farts things is like I can now listen to what I want to listen to whenever I want to listen to it. You know, Pascal and I, and maybe Marcus, come from an era of like CD booklets and large tape collections where you have to sort through. And even Lillian, you come from the first wave of the iPod, which was fascinating for all of us. I remember my buddy.
I also had CD booklets.
You had CD. You're old enough to have a CD booklet, or your parents?
I'm okay. I'm 30, and I think that you think that this happened much more recently. Like, I think you think those are older or younger. I think you're getting the time overlap wrong. I had CDs like until for a while.
You had CDs for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And then somebody handed you an iPod and you fuck this, because we all did. So yeah. We were like this. I remember I had an iPod and we were like, what is that? He goes, I just put every CD I have in here. We were like, how?
Yes.
How did it fit?
It's like straight up, it's like in the computer. What?
Like, show us more. And the streaming services have taken even that away, where we owned the iPod, right? Now it's like, well, I have a streaming service and I can listen to pretty much any album I want to listen to. Sans Neil Young. Whenever I want to listen to it. And back to the Neil Young generating money point that I was trying to make initially, and I got a little sidetracked, as I am. I'm telling you guys, I'll be honest. I'm brainstorming a lot of this out, and I'm jotting down notes constantly because I do want to write something about this and do a video essay on this. Neil Young, Paul McCartney, The Who, the Rolling Stones, Roger Waters. What other old white man am I forgetting? Did I say Bob Dylan?
Bob Dylan, yeah.
Okay. They played a festival. It was the only time all of these people had been on the same stage. And it was in 2016. It was called Desert Trip, or as you young people called it, Old Cella.
Not to be confused with Old Yeller.
So this festival, which was at the same place as Coachella, of course you make a smaller footprint because Coachella has like 20, 30 stages. These guys generated ridiculous money. 6 bands generated ridiculous money that dollar per head definitely dwarfed what Coachella with 100 bands did. People of various age groups came to see that. It wasn't just old boomers. As a motherfucker that was there, as a motherfucker that does the numbers for these things. It was such a moneymaker. They were like, we got to do it again, but everybody's dead. Who else can we get to do it again? Because this was such a money-making event. We want to do it again. They were throwing, so I feel shitty for saying the name of the band. I will let you guys guess of the name of the band that they were trying to get to do it again.
The Rolling Stones.
Nope, Rolling Stones were on the one I was at. The Stones, The Who. This is all in one fest. The Stones, The Who.
But I thought you were saying to do it again. I was just thinking about who's still alive.
Another band. We got to find another band. And we'll pay them whatever the fuck they want because this shit makes so much fucking money.
Ricky Beverly and Mays?
No. That Negro can go to the fucking fairgrounds. No.
Share? First Wind Fire.
No. You'll never get it. You'll never guess. But it didn't happen.
The Eagles could be an option. Somebody said that in the chat.
No, the Eagles are not a draw like that.
Really?
No.
Really?
Older bands are a draw, but there's certain bands that like, oh, I can go see this. And then also guys have fought for years. So there's the Eagles with like the bass player that's alive. Everybody's dead too. It's not Creedence. That's funny.
I think the biggest concert I've been to is like I've seen Jay-Z, I've seen Lil Wayne concert. The biggest concert I've been to was when my parents took me and my brother to see Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Really?
I can see that.
Like, was fucking huge.
I was going to tell you where the first concert I went to, but I don't want to hear people talk about, wow, how you're that old? I'm not going to say anything.
When Socrates spoke at the Pentagon.
The first concert I went to was when I was 6 years old. My mother literally took me to a Jackson 5 concert in Madison Square Garden.
Oh,
God damn.
That's pretty cool.
That's actually pretty fucking
That's dope.
I think the biggest concerts I went to were, I've seen Kanye West in concert 4 times. And one time it was with Jay-Z at the United Center. That was big.
Oh, shit. Oh, man. My
I went
cousin
to the
cried.
Watch the Throne tour. That was a crazy tour because they came out on time. Like, yeah, like so I was there and I was
the myth about black people is not true. Oh
no, but I just think that you never go to a concert and expect them to come like to start promptly. That's not what goes on. At least I mean I don't go to that many, but that's my impression. And we show up there and I remember I was like getting a beer in the, like the area outside and everybody's milling about. People aren't even in there. And then suddenly these sounds start happening and everything goes dark. And I'm like, and you start hearing like Kanye West yelling at out something. And you're just like, wait a minute, are they starting? So then we went into the stadium and there they were like coming out of the floor. And like there was no fans. Everyone is like running in there to like get going. So they just like started promptly at 9:00 and then like everyone had to catch up. That was a pretty but then people came. And then I went to see Madonna one time. Madonna was in it.
I've never seen Madonna. There's a few people I have not seen. I would like to see Madonna.
She's a great performer. I gotta hand it to Madonna. I mean, as far as those big shows goes, it's more like theater. You know what I mean? It's like fun.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Prince when I was an undergrad in college.
Ooh.
National Coliseum.
That's another show. My first concert was MC Hammer, NWA, Oaktown's 357, and Michelle A. at the Thomas and Mack Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada on my 12th birthday.
I thought probably my favorite was seeing Method Man in a bar with probably 50 other people in this like
Ooh.
hole in the wall bar in Toledo because he was going from Columbus up to Detroit, and they just made a stop. You know, hey, let's just chill hill, do a show real quick. And yeah, that was amazing. Like, I mean, it would have been cool with all the lights and shit like that, but it's like you don't buy like literally you can't see that shit.
Small
very often.
shows, or I saw Muse at a club called 330 Rich. So for the Bay Area people, I saw Muse at 330 Rich, a tiny fucking maybe 200 cap room club, and Muse plays as arenas, and it was fucking awesome. And I played blackjack with Method Man in Vegas.
Oh damn!
Ooh.
And I lost my ass, and he loaned me $40 to double down. And then I won the money.
You
And then
won?
I gave him the money back. I won him the money back. He's like, no, I'll keep it. And then we had to talk for a while. He was actually really, really nice. We were
So
at $15.
I have to get going, but I have one final question for Jason, since
Oh,
you're
shit.
talking about metal.
Oh shit.
I come from Illinois, and I had lots of little white kids running around who were into metal. And the specific metal that these kids were into was Christian metal. They
Yes.
had these Christian. What?
Good friends.
Look at Pascal's face.
So my under oath, right?
If you, I don't know. Honestly,
Yeah, the
this was
names.
not my thing. This was not my thing. But I was in circles of people whose thing it was. What if you could summarize that cultural moment, whatever that was, in like a minute? What would you say that's all about?
Those were kids who didn't like Christian music because there's always a Christian version of something. So if you came from a Christian, I'm assuming you're outside of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a Christian version of something. Oh, this is the Christian version of Rat. This is the Christian version of Metallica. So there was a generation of kids about my age that were like, we don't want to be the Christian version of anything. We want to do this music. But the only way they could do it was say they were Christian. So that genre, in my opinion, was extreme. Not all the bands, but a lot of the bands were extremely heavy. And then being Christian made them extremely successful because you sell it at Christian record stores and they toured at churches. So if you're a Christian kid, you can't go to the secular heavy show because that's where the demons and the devils are. That's where they're going to corrupt your soul. When you tell mom and dad, the guys literally sounding the same way, but saying something about Jesus at the end of the night, they could do that. So that was a huge thing for young people that liked heavy music. They were able to do it because of the Christian moniker.
Like, so were these bands just they were grifting? Were they grifting? Were they someone was just like, listen, all we got to do is do the same show but put a cross on stage? Right?
No,
He's like,
you're
you know,
talking
the
about-
cross that we have upside down, right side up.
You're talking about people
What
that
if-
I know personally very, very well.
I'm not saying like I'm not talking about the whole genre. I'm just asking, like, if you said, "Oh yeah, it's the same thing," but all I had to do is do it Christian, you know, like.
I can't answer that question because it's I can't answer it in the minute that Lillian wants. I know you're busy, Lillian. If you want to take off,
Yeah, I need to get going, but I was just curious. I've never really like analysis of what this was all about, because I think my friends who like used to like that, they defend it as like having been good music. I mean, some people think about it differently now, but they don't think it was like shitty or whatever. Like whereas like sometimes you look back on Christian music, like the evangelical people who have post-evangelical stress disorder or whatever will look back and they'll be like, yeah, that was super lame, terrible, like Jesus pop music. That was awful. It's just not the vibe that I get from the people who were into the metal. It seemed like they genuinely liked it, even if it's no longer their thing. Like it doesn't fall into that was so lame, I shouldn't have listened to that category.
It's getting a bit of a resurgence right now, as all things do. But go do your thing.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye,
Thanks
Lillian.
for talking about abortion. Nice to see you.
Was Lillian Cicerchia, co-host of What's Left Philosophy. And thank you so much, Lillian, for coming on and having this talk. But as far as is it a grift, I can only answer by, and when I say like these are my friends, like these are people that have been in my home. I know these motherfuckers. They've housed me on tour.
I'm not trying to take shots at people you know.
I'll
and
be
love.
honest. I'll be honest, because there's always a market force for the music that you create, and you can't ever deny that. And again, if these guys would have told their parents, because a lot of them came from conservative enclaves. This isn't music that came out of LA and New York. This is music that came out of the South, Alabama, Clearwater, Florida, Pensacola, North Carolina. These kids.
I love how you say all these South names like you're like literally like someone just fought. Oh God, North Carolina. Oh,
we'll think about it. When you think of,
God damn it, Alabama. Oh, yeah.
When we think of this kind of music, even if you think it's a certain sound of hip hop, the static nature of New York definitely goes into why that music sounds the way it does, right? So when you think of metal and
Whoa,
punk,
what do you mean static nature in New York? Man, you best back up. What you talking about static nature in New York? Fool, you out your mind, man.
Man, he said New York's a one-trick pony. You got Tim's and hip hop.
I knew Pascal was gonna get mad. I was fucking with him. I was not being serious. But seriously though, you think about what makes certain music sound the way it does, and your environment, has a lot to do with that. So these kids coming from sometimes rural parts of the South, you're not going to be able to make Satan's music because your parents aren't going to buy you the instruments, they're not going to buy you the records. So to get mom and dad to let them do the music, it's Christian. And also these kids, they were young. They were 16, 17 years old, getting record deals. And the Christian label is going to put you on a Christian tour. And that's going to have some sort of influence on your sound. But once they broke through, they necessarily didn't have to be beholden to the Christian moniker. And a lot definitely tried to separate from it. But that ended up being a problem for the secular world, because there were secular producers in the genre that were like, I can't deal with you because you were a Christian band.
Yeah. Which, so I mean, I found like the thing that you like when you kind of first hit it off of just like, hey, we live in a society, right? And like those things are going to, inherently drive really anything you do, right? To fucking t-shirt I'm wearing and like where I'm going to go later today, and like, but no, and like, and that's where too of like it just seemed like they're and really across the board with Christian music, because I was, my parents like dragged me to church, and you see those type of things like, well, why don't you listen to this rapper? It's like because he sucks.
Ahmad is a Christian rapper. Remember Ahmad back in the day?
Yeah.
I'm not a kid anymore.
But I mean, oh well,
Yeah,
but I know
it's DC talk. There's a long line of mediocre Christian artists, but you're able to buy that Christian record. You're going to get money to go to the store to buy that Christian record, so that's why you keep making that Christian music. And
I think the thing that's scary now is that where I see that resurgence, that type of thing happening, is that with like MAGA.
Yeah,
like
I am.
Kid Rock making a song, ain't nobody gonna tell me how to live, liberal snowflakes and all this shit. Comedy is the same fucking thing. Like literally, it's like you don't have to be funny, you don't have to be good at what you're doing, but if you do it in a Trump hat, you'll get some sales. You're right.
Yes, and that's what the kind of the Christian thing was to a certain degree. Degree.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for joining us on this lovely Saturday evening, afternoon. For me, it's still morning. I'm going to hang up this call, make some loud music, and some motherfucking pancakes. Thank you guys so much. Please enjoy the cartoons / capitalist realism of my childhood and music I made for my 3-year-old son.